Right now, the day's biggest news stories from a Vegas perspective. This is the Vegas Take with Sharp and Shapiro.
All right, welcome back. It is the Vegas Take, Sharp and Shapiro. So glad you could join us on a Wednesday. We are following the trial proceedings in the Senate in regards to Donald Trump, and pretty soon House managers will be presenting opening arguments. So the gentleman we have with us on the line right now, he is a former congressman, and he was also one of the Clinton impeachment managers in the late 90s, now a judge. Very lucky to have him on the show. That would be Judge James Rogan joining us. Judge, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Brian, I'm fine. Thank you. Delighted to be on with you. I was just telling your producer, Jason, that Vegas is one of my wife's and my favorite cities. We come a couple times a year. We love it. And the irony is she grew up in the church and sang in the choir. We were married for 20 years. I could never talk her into coming to Vegas. She was convinced that it was a city with dirt streets and brothels on every corner. And she finally broke down and came with me. And now she drags me back 2 or 3 times a year. So
you see that, Judge? You need to tell Mike Pence that. You see, Judge, there's a lot of fun things you can do in Vegas. You're right. It's not just strip clubs. And I think the misconception from a lot of people, and I'm glad you guys come out here, by the way, is that Vegas is just a party town, and that's all there is strippers and gambling. Let me tell you something, man. Where this radio station is, there are a lot of nice neighborhoods here in Vegas, too. I love it here, Judge, so I appreciate that.
The irony of all of this is I paid my way through law school bartending in a female mud wrestling bar, and for about a week I was a bouncer in a porno theater and jobs like that.
Wait, hold on a second.
I don't even drink and gamble, and all my judge buddies who drink and gamble, they just cannot understand what possibly do you and your wife do.
Wait, hold on, Judge.
If you're not drinking and gambling.
Judge, hold on a second.
They just don't understand. So if I run into my old friend Mike Pence, whom I haven't seen in 20 years, but I knew him back when he was a talk radio host, I'll tell him that.
Wait, hold on a second, Judge. You said you were a bouncer in a porn theater?
Well, it was only about a week or so. I don't want to make you think it was a lifestyle. Yeah, I was.
Was Pee Wee Herman? Did your
mother was a convicted felon? I was the illegitimate son of a convicted felon mom. I got expelled from high school in the 10th grade, and I worked my way through college and law school, bartending all over Hollywood and on the Sunset Strip. And
wow, that's incredible.
Wrestling bar, female hot oil wrestling bar.
Well, I'm going to tell you something.
In my first book, Rough Edges, just what you expect to hear from a conservative Christian member of Congress.
Let me tell you something. You've already turned into my favorite judge. Okay, let's just start there. But okay.
Well, I hope you feel that way if you ever have to stand in front of me for something.
Well, hopefully that'll never happen. But you never know with me. I get into trouble sometimes. But Judge, I appreciate you coming on. And the fact that you're a former congressman and you were in the Clinton impeachment, you were in Clinton impeachment manager in the late 90s. I have to ask you this. I know there's certain things you can't talk about, but when you first heard that Donald Trump was going through this stuff and there was going to be this trial, I would imagine thoughts went through your head about what happened in the late 90s. Can you tell us what went through your head when you heard about this?
I really don't remember if there was anything profound that went through my head. I do know that having gone through a presidential impeachment, and when we did it 21 years ago, it's the first time in 135 years that it had happened. There was nobody alive, obviously, on the planet who had ever seen one of these. But I was hopeful and probably expecting that I'd never see another one of these in my life again. So, for better or for worse, here we are. And it's the stuff of history, whether you love or you hate the president.
Right. Let's go back to the late 90s for a second. And, full disclosure, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I thought Bill Clinton was a decent president. I don't agree with what he did. He lied. We agree on that. And what he did was improper and an embarrassment to the country. And I have no problem with what you did in the late 90s. However, do you think it's fair, and I'll just speak in the impeachment of Bill Clinton, don't you think it's fair for the other side that is not defending the president, and clearly you were not, Republicans were not, don't you think it's fair to get all the information possible, subpoena witnesses, if it is necessary to help your case? I would imagine you wanted all the information you could back in the late 90s, correct?
Well, let me try to answer your question. And again, I have to walk a very careful line.
I understand.
Because as a sitting judge, I can't I am precluded by the canons of ethics from discussing anything related to the current situation.
Understood. Yep.
But if you go back and you look at the arguments that we were having with the Senate as the House managers, some of them may sound familiar, but the familiarity ends there because it was a totally different context. In our case at the House Judiciary Committee, we had a special prosecutor report who delivered 50,000 pages of documents and exhibits and identified 11 separate felonies, identifiable felonies that President Clinton had committed during our committee hearings. We gave the Democrats subpoena power. They brought in their own witnesses. We allowed the president's attorney there to cross-examine Ken Starr, and
which I appreciate.
On the stand that day for like 17 hours.
Right, I appreciate
we started
that.
in the morning, and we went into like 1 o'clock the next morning.
Right.
Now, when we got to the Senate, I was very naive, and even though I had been a former gang murder prosecutor in L.A., and at the time I was a former judge, too, because I'd been a judge beforehand. And I was under the impression, as were all the House managers, we were actually going to be able to try the case. And I fought like hell with the senators who did not want us to call any witnesses. They wouldn't let us call any witnesses. But it was a different political dynamic. The Senate was run by Republicans at the time, but Trent Lott, the Republican leader of the Senate, came and told me and told our committee investigator, it's in my book, Catching Our Flag, and it's in Dave Shipper's book, Sellout. Lott told us, hey, listen, this is politically unpopular. You guys impeached him when the polls didn't want you to do it, so you've jumped off a cliff. You need to all make this go away, and don't bring this over to us, because if you do, we're going to. I'm not quoting him exactly, but the message was, we're going to move heaven and earth to tube your case. And you guys are going to be the goats.
But as a judge,
you're going to be the goats. We'll be the heroes.
But Judge,
I remember he told me, we don't care if you have pictures of Bill Clinton standing over a dead woman with a smoking gun in his hand. The polls didn't want him impeached, and we're going to make it go away.
Can I ask you about
that,
Judge?
We had a different dynamic. We had a hostile Senate who just didn't want to handle it politically, and when we brought it to them, they moved in a bipartisan fashion to kill our case.
Judge, I have to ask you about that. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Judge James Rogan, former Congressman, Clinton impeachment manager in the late 90s. As a judge, and even I'm not a judge, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with looking at polls and letting that affect how you conduct yourself in a trial. I don't think polls should have anything to do, and I mean anything to do, with the decision-making and trying to figure out whether the president committed a crime or not and whether he should be gone. What is your take on that? Because that's my opinion. Who cares what the polls say? It shouldn't be about politics. It should be all about, did the president commit a crime, yes or no?
I can't help but smile, Brian, as I hear you say that, because of the 13 House managers in the Clinton impeachment trial, I was the only one at risk over this. I represented a heavily Democratic district as a Republican. I had most of the Hollywood movie studios in my district.
Wow.
And just before impeachment, Bill Clinton had a 75% approval rating in my district. And my guys took a poll just before I voted to impeach him that said, if you vote to impeach him, 75% of the voters in this area will never vote for you again. So I knew that my neck was on the chopping block, so I kind of gave it the office on that issue. I went home and I told my district for the next year and a half, I kept telling them, listen, don't be hypocrites. You people and everybody in America always says in a poll, you want your congressman to do the right thing, even if it's not popular. And if that's really true, then you need to take a look at the fact that I did what was right. I did what was constitutional. The president committed identifiable felonies. We held him to account for it. And I somewhat persuaded my district. At the next election, only 60% of them never voted for me again. So they threw me out of office. And I can't complain about that, because I knew that was the cost of doing business. In fact, if you ever YouTube my closing argument to the Senate, I made that point. I told the senators that basically, hey, look, I wanted to do this job since I was in fourth grade. I've been here one term, and because I have taken this position, I won't be coming back. This is going to cost me my job. I'm here on a principle, and a principle is that when a president commits felonies, it ought to be a one-way ticket to the eviction line at the White House.
Well, Judge, it sounds like it took courage to do what you did. I think we need more politicians in Washington today that have that kind of courage. Now, you said it yourself. I'm going to use your words. Do the right thing. do what is right. Now, I know there's a fine line that you can't talk about today, so I'm going to ask you this question in very general terms.
You can ask me any question you want, Brian, and I give people bad news and tell them no for a living, so you don't have to worry about hurting my feelings.
Well, I don't want to hurt your feelings, and I don't want to put you in a peculiar spot, so I'll ask the question like this. Do you feel like many Republicans today are more concerned about staying in office and appeasing certain people in office rather than what you just said, which is doing the right thing?
I can't answer the question about people in office today for two reasons. I think that would cross a line. And second, I've been out of it for 20 years, so the changeover has been so dramatic in the House and in the Senate. I mean, a lot of the old timers were there when I was there, but I really can't generalize in that area.
So let me ask you.
I will tell you though, my experience. We politicians are, when I was in Congress, and I wasn't immune to this, we are hardwired to get reelected. I mean, most of us don't want to jump off a cliff once we get to Congress. And I certainly was not anxious to do it. My problem was I was a former prosecutor and a former judge. And when I saw clear evidence, uncontrovertible evidence of President Clinton committing felonies, which he, by the way, most people forget this. On his last day in office, do you remember what he did? He admitted it, and he signed a plea bargain to avoid being indicted and prosecuted.
I remember.
On his first day as a private citizen. Nobody remembers that. So it was clear evidence of felonies. The president even admitted it on his last day in office to avoid being prosecuted. I felt I had a job to do. I've never snibbled about losing re-election. I knew the cost of doing business. I knew I was going to anger my base. And by the way, when you're a congressman, if you anger your base, if you're no longer representing them, you should expect that if you're not representing their views or their whims, you should expect that they're going to remember that at the next election. But the one thing that gave me some comfort during all of that is, and I used to quote it often, and pardon me if I butcher it, but Edmund Burke, a great member of Parliament back in the 1700s, wrote a letter to his Bristol constituents, and he basically answered that question. Well, if you're our representative, shouldn't we do what the polls tell you to do? He answered that question 250 years ago. He said, your representative doesn't just owe you his vote. He owes you his judgment, and he betrays you rather than serves you if he sacrifices one for the other. And I think that that's a good thing for everybody in politics who serve in a representative capacity to remember. You're not just there to cast a vote. You are there to do the job. And as I used to tell my constituents, I know that you didn't want President Clinton impeached, and I know you didn't like me for impeaching him, but understand something. We had 700,000 people in this district, and only one of them has gone through all the FBI reports and all the documents and all the evidence. And my judgment is that based upon that, the president needs to be removed from office. And can I leave you with one other thing, Brian?
Sure.
Because, most people think, he got impeached for lying about sex and so forth. That's not true. That really is, that's false memory.
He lied.
The president was ordered to testify in a federal civil rights action. And he lied under oath, and then he moved heaven and earth to try to hide evidence and obstruct justice to hide his perjury. And so the reason I voted to impeach him is because, the Constitution says, and you're hearing this phrase a lot now, that a president can be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. But the framers never identified high crimes and misdemeanors. So guess where the definition comes from?
Where's that?
It comes from all the precedents of the previous impeachments. And by the time we had Clinton's, there had been about 16 or 17 of them.
I see.
Had I voted to save my skin and say that perjury and obstruction of justice were not impeachable offenses, that would have set a standard for every future president. They could commit those offenses, and they could rightfully say, hey, look, that's already been decided. It may be awful. Maybe you can prosecute me later, but you can't remove me from office. And I used to tell my Democrats in my district, go ahead and be mad at me, but understand that we set a standard that tells every future president of the United States, if you commit perjury or obstruct justice, and you do it in an area or in a subject matter far more dangerous or offensive than what you saw in the Clinton case,
Yep.
you can thank us for setting that standard that it's a removable offense.
Well, it is the reason
that
why.
didn't convince anybody.
Sure.
Oh, by the way, trivia question. In 2000, I lost to whom?
Oh, boy, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you.
Let me tell you. Adam Schiff.
Did you really? But you know what? I bet you wouldn't call him Shifty Schiff. I think you would have more respect for him than that. That's just my opinion.
Adam and I ran against each other 3 different times. We ran again. I beat him twice for the state assembly. He finally beat me in my 3rd term for Congress after impeachment. I always like to remind Adam I'm still up on him 2-1, but he reminds me, yes, but that one really counted, didn't it?
Listen, if people bring up your name, you're a respected guy. I think you did the right thing many years ago, and I know you haven't been in politics for a little while, but you chose, what's best for the country and the law over whether you get reelected or not, and you didn't worry about that. And that's why I have a tremendous amount of respect for you, Judge.
Brian, I sure could have used your voting in my district back in 2000. One other trivia question.
Sure. Go for it.
It's not really a trivia question. It's a fact that no reporter, I think, has picked up on. So I took the place of Carlos Moorhead in the old 27th Congressional District in California. Carlos Moorhead, in his freshman term, was on the Judiciary Committee for the Nixon impeachment articles.
Oh, my goodness.
So the 3 consecutive congressmen from the old 27th District were on the Nixon impeachment, the Clinton impeachment, and now the Trump impeachment.
How about
there must be
that?
something in the water.
That is incredible. Well, let me just say, I hope I never meet you in the courtroom, sir. But if you're ever in Vegas with your wife, please give our producer a call. We'd love to have you in studio, okay?
You know what? Probably look for us in July. How's that?
Great. I would love to have you in studio, Judge. Thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate
it.
Brian.
Brian. I told JD I hope he gets rid of the mold problem in his house.
I'll make sure to let him know. Look forward to meeting you, Judge. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Brian.
Appreciate it. There you go. Wow, that guy's a funny guy. He's got a lot of charisma. I like him. That's former Congressman and Clinton impeachment manager, Judge James Rogan, who at once was a security guard in a porn theater. I was going to ask him if he ever met Pee Wee Herman in his theater. But anyway, that guy's a trip, man. I like that guy. That guy's got a personality. Why can't we have Republicans like Judge James Rogan? That guy's a cool dude, okay? A Republican that goes on the air that's a judge who has no problem admitting he loves to party in Las Vegas and he used to be a security guard in a porn theater. That is a Republican that I could easily vote for. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the words of Hillary Clinton that not only are going to hurt Bernie Sanders, but could hurt Hillary Clinton's future if she ever decides to run again. We'll tell you exactly what she said coming up next. You're listening to The Vegas Take right here on the all-new 101.5 FM, 720 AM, KDAWN.